The Åland Islands Solution, a precedent for successful international dispute settlement. The strategic Åland Islands. The Åland Islands, located at the crossroads of shipping routes between the Swedish capital of Stockholm, the Gulf of Bothnia, and the Gulf of Finland, were part of the Kingdom of Sweden until the Russian conquest of all territory east of the Gulf of Bothnia in 1809. Despite an agreement on demilitarization in 1856 after the Crimean War, the Swedish-speaking islands became a hotspot of international tension in the aftermath of World War I. The status of the Åland Islands was at the center of a dispute. Should they remain part of Finland or be attached to Sweden? Should a key location in the Baltic Sea be demilitarized? At the end of 1921, after a long and arduous process, decisions were made on the status of the Åland Islands, their demilitarization and neutralization. Agreements were reached with the help of the League of Nations, the pioneer organization for international relations and a forerunner of the United Nations. The Åland Islands Solution remains to this day an important case in international law. The Åland Islands Solution exhibition illustrates the preparation leading to and the aftermath of the decision made by the League of Nations and the parties involved. It draws from a unique and outstanding archival documents from the collection of the League of Nations Archives at the United Nations Office at Geneva, the National Archives of Finland, the Archives of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland, and the Museum of Åland. In the turbulence of World War I. Despite the 1856 Convention on the Demilitarization of Åland, the Russian Navy started again to fortify the islands in 1915. In the course of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in late 1917, Finland gained independence, provoking a civil war on the Finnish mainland. However, Russian troops still remained on the fortified Åland Islands, which prompted a Swedish military intervention in February 1918 on the professed grounds of protecting the civilians of Åland. The actions of Sweden were welcomed by local inhabitants, who had expressed hopes that the island would fall under Swedish sovereignty. These plans were hampered by the arrival of Finnish forces in February, and subsequently thwarted by the German intervention on the islands in March 1918. The remaining Russian soldiers on Åland were taken prisoner. Following Germany's surrender in November, Finland lost German military and political support, forcing Finland to accept Swedish demands for the demolition of all military installations on Åland. The demilitarization was carried out during 1919 under the observation of a mixed Finnish-Swedish-German control commission. A territory under tension. While the fortification on the Åland Islands were removed, Sweden exerted diplomatic pressure on the Finnish government regarding the sovereignty of the archipelago, which led to a heated exchange of memorandums, booklets, and articles. In late autumn 1919, the former Finnish Minister of Interior, Antti Tulenheimo, drafted an act on the autonomy of Åland. It followed outlines which had already been presented in spring 1918 by pro-Finnish loyalists with links to Åland. This first act on the autonomy of Åland was passed by the Finnish Parliament in May 1920, providing Finnish delegates with support in the conflict over Åland, as an expression of Finnish benevolence towards the local inhabitants. In June 1920, this first act on autonomy was demonstratively rejected on Åland by two local leaders, Julius Sundblom and Carl Björkman, in the presence of the Finnish Prime Minister Rafael Erich. The two leaders were immediately arrested after this incident and tried. Internationalization of the dispute. A claim for the incorporation of Åland into Sweden had been presented to the peace conference in Paris in early 1919, but the Allies were reluctant to get involved in the dispute as long as the outcome of the Russian Civil War remained unclear. In June 1920, however, the British government urged the Council of the newly created League of Nations to handle the dispute. Sweden was an early member of the League, whereas Finland became a member only in December 1920. In July 1920, the Council entrusted an international committee of jurists to consider the competence of the League to resolve the dispute. The correspondence with the Secretariat of the League of Nations became intense. Finnish delegates, led by Minister Carl Enkel, defended the view that Finnish sovereignty made it an internal affair. Swedish delegates, led by Prime Minister Hjalmar Branting, countered that the recognition of an independent and sovereign Finland by Sweden on January 4, 1918, had nothing to do with the definition of frontier lines. The League of Nations at work. The International Committee of Jurists was composed of 3 experts in international law: Professor F. Larnaud, Dean of the Faculty of the Law of Paris; Professor A. Strauken, Councillor of State of the Kingdom of the Netherlands; and Professor Max Huber, legal advisor of the Swiss Political Department. They were requested by the Council of League, firstly, to resolve whether the Swedish claims to Åland were an infringement of Finnish sovereignty, and secondly, to give a statement on international commitments relating to the demilitarization of the Åland Islands. In September 1920, the committee made an unambiguous statement. The League of Nations was competent to rule on the dispute concerning the Åland Islands. Finland was a fully constituted and sovereign state, but Åland had rights which Finland would have to acknowledge, and that made the League qualified to recommend a solution to the dispute over Åland. This statement was greeted with great satisfaction on the Åland Islands and in Sweden. A solution accepted by all parties. Following the jurist report, the Council of the League of Nations appointed a commission of rapporteurs to gather relevant information about the Åland Islands, to examine and consider the arguments presented by Finland, Sweden, and local representatives, and to recommend a solution. The report submitted by the Commission of Rapporteurs in April 1921 did not endorse suggestions of a referendum on the islands, but acknowledged instead Finnish sovereignty, recommending additional autonomy for Åland and guarantees for the rights of the local population for the preservation of their language, culture, and local Swedish traditions. The need for the military neutralization of Åland was also pointed out. The Council of the League of Nations convened on June 20, 1921 for final deliberations and made its decision on June 24th in accordance with these recommendations. The agreement reached by the representatives of Finland and Sweden with the assistance of members of the Council was not fully satisfactory for the parties, nor for the islanders, but all complied. Demilitarization of the archipelago. The Council of the League of Nations also endorsed the proposal of the Commission of Rapporteurs to demilitarize and neutralize the Åland Islands through a multilateral convention signed by the great powers and countries bordering the Baltic Sea. under the supervision of the League of Nations. The Convention relating to the non-fortification and neutralization of the Åland Islands was signed on October 20, 1921, by the representatives of 10 countries: the British Empire, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Germany, Italy, Latvia, Poland, and Sweden, and deposited at the Permanent Secretariat of the League of Nations. The Convention affirmed the demilitarized status of Åland agreed upon in 1856 and defined the borders and territory of the demilitarized islands by 17 reference marks and connecting straight lines, creating a zone where military installation on land and in adjoining seawaters remained prohibited. The signatories pledged to provide Finland with military support in case of an attack against Åland. Autonomy, demilitarization, and neutralization opened a new era for the Åland Islands. Neutralization during World War II. Preserving the neutralization proved difficult in the context of the international turbulence of the late 1930s. Finland and Sweden planned for a joint partial remilitarization of Åland to protect the neutralization, but the so-called Stockholm Plan was finally abandoned in May 1939 due to Soviet pressure. In the Winter War against the Soviet Union, 1939-40, Finnish troops were sent to Åland and temporary coastal batteries were installed. The troops and guns remained there after the peace treaty of March 1940, but were removed after Soviet pressure later in the summer. In October 1940, a separate Finnish-Soviet treaty was signed in Moscow, regulating the demilitarization of the islands and establishing a Soviet consulate on Åland. In the continuation war against the Soviet Union, 1941-44, Finnish troops were again sent to Åland and permanent coastal forts were constructed. They remained until the armistice in September 1944 and were later demolished under the observation of an Allied, i.e. Soviet, Control Commission. The demilitarization and neutralization of the Åland Islands was finally restored by the peace treaty signed in Paris in 1947. Autonomous status. Since the passing of the Act on the Autonomy of Åland by the Parliament of Finland in 1922, the Act has been amended a number of times. From the beginning, Åland was granted a self-governing local parliament and a provincial executive council, with a province governor as the guardian of Finnish state interests. Since the 1920s, however, the sphere of autonomy of Åland has been expanded repeatedly, and many tasks have been transferred from Finnish state authorities to the local provincial government. The transfer of taxation and other mandates of an economic nature affecting not only Finland but the whole Baltic region have also been discussed. However, the protection of local property ownership and strong guarantees for the Swedish-speaking status of the territory still remain key points of the current Act. The Åland example. The initial disappointment has been gradually replaced by a growing satisfaction with the solution, which became a significant victory for the League of Nations. The convention relating to the non-fortification and neutralization of the Åland Islands is still in force, and the autonomy of the islands is firmly anchored in both customary international law and Finnish constitutional law. The autonomous parliament and government building is a landmark in the town of Mariehamn. Features, such as the flag and postal stamps, underline the autonomous status of Åland. The safeguarding of the demilitarized status of Åland remains a Finnish responsibility, and the inhabitants of Åland are exempted from compulsory service in the Finnish Defence Forces. Beyond its specificity, the Åland Islands Solution continues today to be referred to as a potential roadmap for the peaceful settlement of international disputes in which minority rights and territorial problems are involved. A prosperous region. Farming, fishing and shipping have always been traditional ways of earning a living on the Åland Islands. Windjammers earned capital the hard way for the maritime expansion starting in the 1950s. Rapidly improving living conditions made tourism an important source of income from the 1960s onwards, with car ferries operating from Åland, transporting millions of passengers annually. Tourism and shipping have made Åland one of the more affluent regions in Europe. Income levels remained high in Åland, while neighbouring regions suffered from the economic crisis in the 1990s and at the beginning of the 21st century. As there is no need for major cuts in public spending, public infrastructure and services can be kept to a very high level. Exemption from EU tax regulation granted to Åland in 1994 provides local entrepreneurs with incentives for creative solutions and future prosperity. Realizing the importance of sustainability. The inhabitants of Åland are aware of the environmental and societal threats caused by the modern way of living. Algal blooms in the waters surrounding the Åland Islands and other visible reminders of increasing environmental problems prompted the government and Parliament of Åland to adopt a policy of total sustainable development in 2014. Total sustainability must be reached no later than in 2051, before the target years of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change. The Development and Sustainability Agenda for Åland consists of a vision and 7 strategic development goals for 2030. Hundreds of people and organizations participated in developing the agenda in 2016, which won the European Sustainability Award in 2019. Purposeful action in daily life and choices in the working practices of all sectors are necessary steps on the road to a viable society, securing a peaceful future for the Åland Islands.